Hey everybody, this is Chris with Keys to the Shop. Welcome to another edition of Shift Break. Happy Thursday to you. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think is an incredibly important topic, and that is the topic of toxic vulnerability. If you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you know that vulnerability in leadership is something that I and guests on the show have encouraged. And that's for a good reason, because it's incredibly important for building rapport, for inspiring others, for growing yourself. You don't want to be a superhero leader. You don't want to be somebody who is seen as trying to be perfect, because everybody knows you're not perfect. So if you try to be, people call BS on that to your face or in their minds about you. So don't even try. We're all struggling, forward. And some of us are in positions of leadership where it's easy to try to pretend that we are perfect or we think we need to be. Vulnerability that is positive, vulnerability is the kind of thing that allows you to be human amongst other humans. You can still be a leader, you can still have authority and be relatable and allow people to speak into you and actually give you feedback and admit when you're wrong. Ask for forgiveness when you're wrong. Grow alongside people as a leader as they grow in their positions. These are the positive things about vulnerability that I encourage. Now, the thing that I want to talk about today, though, is when we use vulnerability as an excuse to basically dump on people and be overly open to the point of being a bit toxic. The professional lines in a cafe exist for a reason. We do work side by side for long hours under, heavy conditions sometimes. And the closest approximation to this kind of bonding that goes on between baristas and other staff could be called family. But we know that family is often used as an excuse to mistreat people, require more than is acceptable or advisable, talk about things that are beyond what you should be talking about at work. Just basically introducing a toxic relationship often comes under the umbrella of being open, but to a fault. And the fault looks a lot like gossip. It looks a lot like throwing people under the bus, be they customers or other staff members that aren't present. Using staff as sounding boards for your own personal problems at home or with others at work. There's a lot of ways that I think we've all experienced a manager or a boss who overshares, who kind of blurs that line of professionalism in the cafe and makes us feel uncomfortable. It's not the vulnerability that really inspires. It's not the kind of vulnerability that makes you want to follow somebody more because you can relate to them. It's the kind of vulnerability that makes you want to run away. It makes others want to say, if you're doing this type of thing, if you're engaging in it, it makes other people feel like you're not a stable person. If you're a leader, you need to project stability. That's not lying. It's inspiration. All of us are unstable. We know that. We don't need you to necessarily constantly reinforce your instability in front of people just because you have the idea that you need to be vulnerable, so you need to tell them how messed up you are all the time. There's a such thing as over-apologizing. I have talked with baristas in the past that have this problem, and managers too, where they're constantly apologizing for things. It's the same kind of concept. Having some kind of confidence in yourself as a leader is not antithetical to being vulnerable and being humble. Let's get that straight. Confidence is not the enemy of being humble and being vulnerable. Your position as a leader is there for a reason. It's there to serve the needs of the cafe, that includes the customers, and especially the needs of the staff. So how do you know when you're getting into this territory of toxic vulnerability as a leader? Because I think we all kind of feel as baristas like when that's happening to us for the reasons I just listed. But as a leader, one of the telltale signs and the root of this is that, one, you don't have an outlet outside of work to be able to talk about your problems with peers. Two, you are doing this to get it off your chest and doing it in a fashion that is shooting from the hip or in the moment. Like if you're just sitting with staff in a meeting and then you just say, you know what, I'm going to be honest with you, and you just let all this stuff out that's been on your mind, it's been on your plate, that you're just like, and this is going on at home, and I have XYZ happening, and you don't understand this, and I feel fill in the blank, and it just kind of spills out of you in this cathartic session. You have most likely stepped over that line of professionalism in the way that you handled yourself in that moment. There needs to be openness with staff, but there can be a time when you're too open. There needs to be vulnerability, but these things need to be done in a planful way. Put some space between the time you think it and the time you say it. That's just kind of a good practice as a person, right? So you can be somewhat in charge of the effects of your words, and you can give yourself time to rethink the way that you say it. Like typing an email and not sending it, for example. That can be cathartic. That's great. And you could have hit send, but coming back to it 2 days later, you would be like, yeah, I'm glad I did not send that. There have been so many times where I have, for instance, I've talked to my wife about situations at work. And had I talked to the people at work about the situation the way that I talked to my wife about it when I was in the raw state of emotion, it would not have turned out well for me. And I think we've all been there. So the space we put between our mind and our mouth is really, really critical. So one thing you can do is to check yourself by asking, in sharing this, am I doing it for the benefit of the staff and the cafe, or am I just doing this because I need to get this off my chest? If it's the latter, then it's likely that you shouldn't say it until you know the benefit that it actually has, and maybe even bounced it off other people. Hey, I'm thinking about sharing this. I would avoid it, honestly. So a leader's job is to provide stability and inspiration and structure, dependability. And you can use vulnerability as a tool for others and not for yourself. When you find other managers and other professionals that are outside your situation or actual family members and not your quote-unquote coffee family, then you're going to be able to really get it off your chest in a safe environment. These are some of the things that I've been thinking about as a kind of counterbalance to vulnerability. I think we've all been on the receiving end of a toxic form or sort of a metastasized form of vulnerability, and we don't like it. We call those leaders people who are toxic and people who are people to be avoided, right? We don't want to be that as leaders. We want to use vulnerability for the benefit of others and put it in its right place. Be open for genuine and authentic relationships in the cafe, but recognize it's still a professional environment. Put the distance between your thoughts and your actions, your words, and determine, is it for the benefit of others, or is this a selfish move? Am I just doing this to vent? So that's it for today's episode. I really thank you for joining me today. I know that this topic is something we've all experienced in varying degrees. And, we can just use the examples that we've seen and experienced to do better ourselves as we inevitably move into various positions of leadership. We want to become more responsible and quality leaders. This is one of those things that will help us in our awareness of the best practices and also the pitfalls that come with being a leader in coffee. So thank you again, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. Join me again next week on Thursday for another edition of Shift Break, from Keys to the Shop.